Welcome to the CROC Podcast.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here is your host, Dr. E.
Howdy, CROC Nation. Dr. Tommy and Ellie here with you with another CROC Podcast. On my side, as always, my page, my bestie, my partner in crime, Angel Santana. Have faith, let it begin. Angel, I understand you have an announcement for our CROC Nation.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I tell each and every one of you that you are listening to Season 5, Episode 1. 5 years ago today, we launched Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer. We know it as the CROC Podcast. Dr. E has changed the landscape. Dr. E has come in and has changed the podcasting world one episode at a time. So we want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you. And that includes all those that supported the CROC Podcast. That includes everyone on the board. We want to thank you for being with us, uniting with us, and to every single patient, family member, those that are still fighting, those that are still being honored and remembered, we say thank you. Dr. E, you have changed my life for the better, and I am honored to be your co-host and friend till the end. Happy 5 years, my friend.
Oh, what a great anniversary. And I was going to say also thank you guys for believing in us. So when we started this experiment 5 years ago, we didn't really know what it was going to turn into, and we've evolved. I hope for the better. We've taken your comments, your criticisms, your thoughts, your suggestions, and hopefully we've made it into a very digestible and helpful. Again, I always use the analogy of a Swiss Army knife to help all of our survivor thrivers enjoy and get through each day of their survivorship. And it's really actually quite apropos, Angel, that today, starting our 5th year, we are going to have the first of a 3-part podcast talking about our survivor thrivers and how they manage their side effects of treatment, and also how the doctors manage the side effects to the treatments that they give to their patients. So that is going to be sort of the gist, and the inspiration for this 3-part module are two people that we're going to meet, 2 patients, 2 friends that we will meet, not this week specifically, we'll meet them next week. But today we'll just set the table. Your thoughts before we start?
Yeah, and I think a programming note is also warranted for this great occasion.
So basically, we're going to be giving you a new episode every 2 weeks, and we're going to keep these episodes, I guess, in the queue for 2 weeks. So this way, if you don't get to it this week, you'll get to it next week, and it'll still be there. Because let's be honest, once a podcast passes us, it's hard to go back and find it. So I think this will be good for everybody. And it'll keep Angel from having a mental breakdown from all the hats that this poor young man wears, but he wears them so well. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about what I call the 8% rule. So when it comes to cancer survivors and side effects from treatments, the thing that vexes me, and one of the things that has stood out to me over the last 30 plus years of practice, is that even if I do everything perfectly, even if my colleague who is a cancer surgeon does everything perfectly, even if my colleague who is a medical oncologist does everything perfectly, between 4 and 8% of their patients, of our patients, 4 to 8 out of 100 patients will have a side effect related to their treatments, which is a vast number. And sometimes those side effects are very severe and really impacts our survivor thrivers' enjoyment of their life and their survivorship. So I got to thinking, there were 2 patients, again, we will meet them on the next podcast, 2 patients that really inspired me with how they were managing their side effects and how they lived their lives in spite of these side effects, and what it meant to them, how it affected them, how they lived with this encumbrance, and also how I managed having to watch patients that I cared about, patients who were my friends, have to deal with what we call morbidity or effects from the treatments that came from my hand. And it's a very powerful subject. And I know that Angel and I touch on this all the time. I think we mentioned cancer side effects and cancer treatment side effects voluminously on this podcast. But we're going to spend 3 weeks and really do a deep dive. And where I started my thought process wasn't even with side effects, but even to take a step further back. And the question I'm going to ask you, Angel, is why do we all, and I don't mean just me and you and the CROC Nation and the CROC Podcast and the Citizens Are United to Overcome organization, always rally around a cancer patient, but pretty much everybody always rallies around the cancer patient. I wanted to get your opinion as to some of the reasons that you see, and then I'll tell you some of the reasons that I see.
So basically, in a nutshell, I think that we rally behind the patient because we want to give them hope. We want to make sure that they are supported during their what could be a difficult time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I thought of three things personally. One of the things that connects me to a cancer survivor is number one, the fearsomeness of the disease. So we are all sort of taken aback. We stand aghast when we hear the word cancer and a person gets cancer that we know in our personal lives, maybe not so much in our daily life because it's what we do for a living. But we see it as a very fearsome disease and a very unpredictable disease and a very unforgiving disease. And we also are taken aback by the unworthiness of the victim. So we look at, people in disease and we see sort of a narrative where a person has certain behaviors or habits that are maybe unhealthy that lead to health problems. But in the case of many cancer thrivers, very healthy people who live very healthy lifestyles, unwittingly or undeservedly get diagnosed with this terrible disease. And sometimes the youth of their life. And the third thing is the brutality of the treatments, which we're going to touch on, obviously, during this module about how difficult cancer surgery is and how disfiguring and how difficult chemotherapy and immunotherapy and targeted therapy are and the effects, and also how difficult sometimes radiation therapy can be and come to peace with that. And I think that I have this deep connection to our survivor thrivers because of this. And it's why I figured out very early in my career that it was going to be necessary for me to be more than just a good doctor, that being a good doctor, being a good oncologist wasn't going to be enough, to really honor the patients that I take care of. And that's why I started CROC, Citizens Are United to Overcome Cancer 26 years ago. And that's why Angel and I do this podcast. It's because of this connection that we feel to you guys out there in our CROC Nation. But if I dug a little deeper, which I did in my mind this entire week, because of those two courageous patients, there's a profoundness to this connection. It's not just a connection that's very superficial or shallow. It's a very deep connection we have with our survivor thrivers. And at the surface, the connection, this bond that we share, is in the quest for a cure of their cancer. And as it should be, cure is number one. And historically speaking, and I have the right to say that because I am kind of historical because I've been doing this for a long time. I remember the days, and I call them the bad old days, where it was cure at any cost. So I've talked about the Halstedian principle. So Dr. Halsted was a surgeon at Columbia. He was one of the proponents of the radical mastectomy. And when I say radical mastectomy, I'm talking about the mastectomies that, basically took every bit of tissue off of the chest wall down to the ribs. And women would get these huge elephantine arms and swelling and edema. And many of them died anyway. And they died horrible deaths because they died not only of their cancer, but they died from all the side effects of their very super aggressive treatment. And the time at the time, the philosophy was we would do anything that was necessary, for a cure. So I call them Holstedian principles, and they were the principles that ruled the day. And I guess the catchphrase was more is better. But many times the cure was many times worse than the disease itself, and the side effects were very, very disabling to our survivor thrivers. So I was again fortunate enough to make it through 3 decades of practice and go into modern times and practice within modern times, and we call modern times now, where there's a change. Modern times call for radical and modern thinking, and also radical changes in philosophy. So now, do we still love to cure our patients? Absolutely. It's our primary imperative. But we have new buzzwords and we have new battle plans. We hear the word early detection. We want to catch our cancer patients early while they're at a stage 1 instead of in the days of Dr. Halstead when they were stage 3 and stage 4. We want to position ourselves to take advantage of innovation and technology. We have amazing imaging now that we didn't have in his day. We have amazing therapeutics. We have immunotherapy. We have targeted therapy. We have gene therapy. And we have to really leverage our arsenal with the new techniques. There's new radiation techniques. There's new radiation machines. There's new surgical techniques. And there's new, oncology thought processes. And the buzzword now is, instead of more is better, less is more. So instead of more is more, less is more. And I think the most important change is that our thought process is that cure without quality is a loss. It's not a win. So if we take care of a patient and we cure them, but the cure is more hideous than the disease, then we didn't do the patient any favor. And if I'm very honest with myself, and if I'm very honest, with my beloved CROC Nation, I think it is the side effects of treatment. This, we call it the morbidity and the harm that we physicians do to our patients. It is these 4 to 8 people out of 100 that, even if we do everything perfectly and exactly, will suffer tremendously directly by our hands. So I think that this is a connectivity. This fact is really more what connects me to my patients than even to my victories and my cures. So even though we talk about side effects constantly, as I mentioned on the CROC podcast, I was inspired by these 2 patients that we'll meet next time that touched me very deeply. And to do a 3-part podcast about how side effects from cancer treatments is what really connects the doctor and our survivor thriver in a very unique and intimate way. And it's a connection not just merely of our bodies or of our minds, but rather it's a connection of our souls. And I realize this statement might seem overly dramatic and hyperbolic, and probably most concerning to the listener is that how I see this connection as a positive thing, not a negative thing. People will probably knee jerk and instinctively say, well, Dr. E, you're causing harm, and not just you, but you representing, the oncology community are harming these patients. How could you see that as a positive thing? But we'll explain that at the next podcast, how this connection, even though it seems to come from a very dark and negative place, is actually a positive thing. And I want to kind of help you believe and take stock of this statement, and at least open your mind to the possibility that this may be true. And I'm going to quote 2 reasons. The first reason is that the first thing that we do as doctors, after we receive our diploma and we go up to the podium and we shake the hand of the dean, and they take our tassel and we put it on the other side of our hat, and they give us our degree, and then we all sit down and everybody claps for us, and then we all stand up, and then we recite the Hippocratic Oath. And one of the most important lines, which I think everybody knows, is doctor first and foremost, do no harm, right? So that's basically in our DNA as doctors. From the minute that we get conferred the degree of doctor, that's the first, vow that we make, and we take that vow very seriously. And the second thing that's so sacred is that we have a patient's trust. So a patient comes to us and they give us their entire trust, and they give up control of their bodies to us, to the oncology staff, to do with what we must in order to cure them. So it's here. It's right in this spot, Angel. It's within the paradox of these ingredients, the Hippocratic Oath, the oath to do no harm, and the gaining of the patient's trust, which is a paradox to the symposium of the cause of side effects. And that's where the relationship becomes nuclear. It becomes very powerful. And the way we're going to set up this module is that today we're setting the table, and we're going to comment on my comments. And then next week we're going to meet, or next podcast, we're going to meet these two amazing survivor thrivers who were the inspiration behind this module. And we're going to go through their journey and what happened to them and why. And we're going to see why it was a positive connection instead of a negative connection. We're also going to look at how these side effects and your relationship with your doctor can become a negative thing if certain criteria are not met. And then we're going to do something very different, Angel. We're going to turn everything on its head, and we're going to look at side effects from the perspective of the oncologist, the perspective of the person that's responsible for causing these side effects, and how they manage to get up every day and go to work, despite knowing that 4 to 8 patients out of 100 that they touch will be damaged or harmed by their care. Angel Santana, your thoughts about today's podcast as an introduction, as sort of a teaser, and going into this module. Wanted to get your perspective and some of your thoughts.
You know what's interesting is that you touched on one thing, and it reminded me of a quote from Willie Nelson. It says, once you replace negative thoughts with positive ones, you'll start having positive results. Now, I'm not saying that obviously in that quote means if you think positive, your cancer is going to go away, but it's all about giving your inner hope, your inner thoughts, and keeping as positive as you can, because if you become positive, it doesn't mean you have to ignore the negative. So I think that we really have to remember that at the end of the day, we're going to give you the tips and the tools that you need to overcome the negativity.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that. So I want to end this podcast on a very positive note. I'm very excited about this podcast series. It is very difficult to talk about, for a doctor to talk about, the cause of side effects and how these side effects are unavoidable and how to manage these side effects. And I think the first thing we're going to do is by managing expectations. But we're going to have two stories starting next time about two very courageous people that you're really going to get to know and love and really be thankful, because I think that their stories will resonate within our survivor thrivers, because all of our survivor thrivers have some level of quality of life issue after their treatments. So I want to take this moment to give honor to not only these two patients of inspiration, but all of our patients, all of our survivor thrivers who are so brave in getting their diagnosis, metabolizing and digesting this diagnosis, managing their fear and their thoughts of not being around for their families and their children, their thoughts of not being able to survive their cancer, and then how they get through their toxic treatments, how they manage these side effects that are happening during treatment, how they manage these side effects as they start to subside, and even how they manage these side effects that might be lifelong. And this module is dedicated to all of you, to all of our survivor thrivers. So we'll end this podcast the way we end all of our podcasts, and that's with our CROC blessing. And I just want to take a moment on behalf of Angel and all of our board of directors, we all wish you a very long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. And we wish that God be with you and help you manage these side effects with success. And we wish you peace and hope and tranquility. God bless you. God be with you. Peace.
Hey, CROC Nation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast to your friends. Visit our website, crocvip.com. We would love to hear your feedback.